actors are like at once like the moth and the flame. Like they are drawn to each other, and they're, like kind of vagabonds. And then you make friendships, you create relationships very, very quickly, faster than any other group of people, because you have to, because otherwise you're going to be pretty lonely on location. And so friendships are formed and last forever. And I just think it's one of the most beautiful things about being an actor.
Please join me in welcoming Stanley Tucci to the stage.
Oh, there's a microphone.
You will be needing that
Yeah.
for quite a while today.
Yes, yes.
We have so much to cover. And I get to start from the very, very beginning with you, which I always love. I love asking this to as many artists as I possibly can. What is the movie you saw, the performance you saw, the personal experience you had, whatever it may be, that first made you say to yourself, I absolutely need to act?
Whatever it was, I cursed the day. No, I'm kidding. I can't say that there was one particular. I think there was a moment when I was about 10 or 11 or something, and I was doing a play in elementary school, and a teacher that I had was he had done an off Broadway show that he had written about the tortoise and the hare, like a little musical, and he was obviously a frustrated actor. He was an amazing teacher. He was an amazing English teacher. And he cast me in the role of the hare, which was the beginning of me playing bad guys for a while. And I knew, like, it sounds weird, but I was on stage and I thought, I feel so much more comfortable here than I do out there. And then that was something that sort of, it disappeared for a while in junior high school. But then in high school, I started doing plays in high school, and I had an amazing teacher, amazing drama teacher. And he did really sophisticated stuff. We did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, if you can imagine. Campbell Scott and I went to high school together, so we did that. And I just remember feeling incredibly comfortable. And having, I just kind of knew what to do instinctively or instinctually. I knew not to turn my back to the audience. I just knew what to do. And it was weird. Now I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think that for me was that thing when I was young was very significant to me, and I'll never forget it.
I'll jump off my little roadmap here for a moment because I love the opportunity to talk about the impact that teachers and maybe acting coaches have on an artist. Is there any particular teacher or acting coach that made a big impression? And if so, what was it about the way that person teaches that best aligned with how you like to learn and evolve your craft?
I had one acting teacher only, ever. And that was a guy named George Morrison, who came out of Chicago. He worked with Mike Nichols a lot. He and Mike had a studio in New York for many years where they taught actors, George being the sort of primary teacher, Mike coming in when he could. And George came out of improvisation, came out of Second City, knew Viola Spolin, Paul Sills. So theater games and improvisation was the basis of my training, along with the method stuff. But the improvisation that George taught, he also incorporated a lot of other things. This was at SUNY at Purchase, which is State University of New York at Purchase, which was a conservatory for music and painting and acting. And the thing that George did, he was always looking for new ways of incorporate new things to incorporate into the sort of craft or art of acting. And one of the things he talked about was neurolinguistic programming, which had a profound effect on me. If you don't know what it is, it's just basically where we all have these different systems. So the way we perceive the world, some people are more visual. It would be your primary system. You're visual. You have an auditory system, a gustatory system, and when we get married to people, inevitably we will share a system, but their primary system will be what is our secondary system, and vice versa. And it sort of, he broke it down into eye movements, the way you move your eyes, the way you has to do with what system you are. It's all very, very, and your language is consistent with that. So if someone's very visual, they'll say, oh yeah, I don't see things that clearly. Or if someone's very sort of olfactory or gustatory, they'll say, oh no, it smells a little fishy to me. Some people will talk about, who are very kinesthetic, will say, oh, I feel that this is this and it just rubbed me the wrong way, all that. And in great playwriting, it's there innately, because the writer is writing, characters so truthfully, and that writer might even not necessarily know that this is happening, but that those that language will be a part of that any given character's way of speaking. So for me, having somebody like George, that was a long, really boring fucking story. I fell asleep. But George was so interesting because he was taking all these really, really interesting things, relating them to acting, but also going back to, the basics of acting, which is improvisation and kind of commedia, and of course the Stanislavski method. So having all of that with one guy for 4 years was really, it was an amazing, amazing gift.
Many follow-up questions. In general,
Sorry.
I love asking people about studying a craft like acting in school, and that approach might be some of the answer to this. But of everything you learned while you were at SUNY Purchase, what is something that you still find yourself actively using to this day? But then also, what is something that you think all the schooling in the world never would have prepared you for when you first started working professionally?
Oh, the disappointment.
I get it.
That's it. Yeah, it's disappointing. You audition for something and then you see the guy who got it and you're like, that guy? I mean, the old joke about the actors and the light bulb, right? How many actors does it take the light bulb? Change the light bulb? Like 4. 1 to do it and 3 to go, I wouldn't have done it like that. But there's also a Teamster joke in there, but I'm not. I'll tell that later. I think that the disappointment was the hardest thing. What was the first part of your question? Forgive me.
Something that you do still use to this day.
Oh, for me, it's the not being afraid to improvise. Of course, according to what it is you're doing, and what the dynamic is on set and everything, or how precious a writer might be about their work. So yeah, I think not being afraid to improvise, which entails not just you giving a performance. Hey, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to riff off of whatever. It has to be connected to the person that you're acting with. It also has to be connected to the film or the play as a whole, the story as a whole. And that's our job. It's not just to go like, hey, look at me. Our job is to fit into that whole.
To follow up on that a little, and feel free to refer to any of your credits, whether it was something from the early days or more recently. But I find often, especially when you're doing improvising, whether it's like heavy improvising or just like little bits here and there, it can be very difficult to figure out, when to lean on what feels true to you in the moment, but when to respect, let's say, the writer's intentions or anybody else you're working with. Can you give us an example of a time when it was difficult for you to figure out whether to go like with your gut with a scene or to listen to what somebody else wanted for it?
I don't know that I can point to something specifically. I do remember, actually, there was a movie I was doing that had been based on a play, and was doing a scene, and I added the actress I was working with said something, and I went, oh. Then I said the line. And then, we cut, and they came up to me and said, oh, could you not say oh there? And I was like, okay. But it was a completely natural reaction. But because the person was a playwright, he didn't quite understand that it's different. And it wasn't, as they say, it wasn't Shakespeare. So you don't do that with Shakespeare, but you do that with a lot of other things because you're recreating naturalistic behavior. If the dialogue is stilted and so sort of cut and dry, it's not going to work, right? It's not going to work. So sometimes you say oh, sometimes you say sometimes you go yeah, and then the line, whatever, I don't know. But I found it really irritating, and it I found that so I'll actually never forget that. I'm really angry about it still. But when I write, if the dialogue that I write, because I've acted it all out myself, works pretty well. But if it doesn't work, I have no problem going, just say something like this. Cut that. Don't say that. Make something up. Whatever. You can't be precious about it. You can't. Otherwise, you have to look at the truth. You have to look at the truth of what's happening in front of you at the moment and what that actor is giving you or not giving you. Maybe they're incapable of giving the thing that you want. So you have to change it. You just change it.
Ooh, I'm going to come back to the many wonderful collaborators you've worked with along the way. First, I want to touch on some of your earliest credits, but with some broader questions so you could pick whatever fits best. First question in that zone is, of all of the earliest sets you were on professionally, which one would you say taught you the most about what you valued in an on-set environment?
Well, that's a really good question. I thought I worked a long, long time ago with Alan Pakula, and it was really, really interesting to me because there was a reverence, for him. But he was never, he never took advantage of that. He was always incredibly focused. And I remember watching him, and he was very kind to me and allowed me to sort of peek behind the monitor and, because he had a very specific way of shooting, those incredible master shots of his. It was a great, great lesson for me, and there was a great respect for him on set, but it wasn't a kind of like, we're afraid of him kind of thing. And then, of course, there are other sets like, when we did The Devil Wears Prada, obviously, it was the most fun thing in the world because David created a really great environment.
We are coming back to that
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah.
I kind of want to turn that towards number ones on the call sheet now. When you were first starting out, is there any particular number one on the call sheet that made a really big impression on you and maybe made you say to yourself, when I'm a leader on set, I want to do it like that person did?
Yeah, there are a lot of people like that. I think I remember doing a movie called The Public Eye that Howard Franklin directed with Joe Pesci, and I was very excited to do it. It was a really, really interesting movie, sort of based on Ouija a bit, the photographer. And it was a really good movie. And I was like, my God, I'm going to work with Joe Pesci. And that in itself was a lesson right there. Because Joe Pesci taught me how to listen. Because when you watch him, and still to this day, you watch him, just watch him listen. That's all he has to do, and you're like, that's the greatest performance ever. He doesn't have to say anything. It's incredible. But when I was working with him, I thought I was so excited to work with him, and I just kind of wanted to watch him. But then I realized he was listening to me so much, and then I got caught up in watching him listen that I couldn't fucking act. I mean, it was. But anyway, but that for me, Joe really set a great tone. He was very funny. He was very nice, and he was completely professional.
That's making me think of one of my favorite, like, big two-part questions to ask. I am just endlessly fascinated by how many different acting techniques there are out there of everyone you've ever worked with. Can you tell me someone who had the most similar approach to the work as your own, where the second you met, you knew you were immediately in sync? But then I also want the opposite, someone who challenged you to adapt and maybe even try something new and for the better.
Okay, so probably by the time, now she was young at the time, and I wish that I had been able to do what she did when she was young. There are two people. When I was younger, I did take myself terribly seriously and made things so much more effort than they had to be. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it makes me sad to think about it. But Emily Blunt, who, is my sister-in-law now, she's the one, when I met her, first of all, I thought she was older than she was because she was so mature. And she had some training, but not, the excessive amount of training that I had. And she was just so good, and she was very happy to laugh about things instantly as soon as she did a take. And by that time in my career, I was more facile, but she was innately facile. So for me, yes, her. And now, excuse me, obviously we spend a lot of time together and when we talk about stuff, obviously we both take what we do very seriously, and on set, very serious. But then when it's over, it's time to go to dinner, and I think that's really, really important. And Meryl, too, is like that. She's in it. She's really in it. And then it's over, and you say, where are we eating? And I think that's really important. And it's not that you're not taking it seriously. It's not you'll go and have dinner, but you know what you have to do the next day, and you prepare for it. But your work, I think what I'm trying to say, a long-winded way of saying, your work should be done prior to you getting in front of that camera. Then things can change. You can discover things and change things and whatever. But really, I don't want to see your work. I don't want to see it. Just do it. And then go home.
Go to dinner.
Go to dinner.
I do want to go back to what you were saying earlier in that answer, the idea of taking yourself too seriously at a point. Do you remember the moment when you kind of broke free of that and what helped that happen?
No, I can't say that there was a real moment that I remember, but I do kind of remember suddenly I was like, oh, and I don't remember the moment. But suddenly one day it was easier than I thought it was. Now, part of that is because you've worked a long time for it. You've, done a lot of different roles. You've practiced, you've rehearsed, you've, studied, but then you have to let it go. And there was I don't know when it was, but obviously there was one day when I let it go. And it became more fun.
It's the best feeling in the world when
Yes.
that happens.
Yeah.
I want to go back to food briefly.
Okay.
You already brought up food. Yeah. And I did want to make sure to include a couple food questions because I know that's another passion of yours. So my first food question does pertain to the craft of acting and just like living in general. This is honestly something I think about doing my work all the time. When you're in the middle of a shooting day, can you give us an example of a meal you turn to that is like tasty and good, but also helps keep you energized and feeling good while you're doing your work?
Yeah, I eat very simply on set. I bring my own food all the time because catering is... So, yeah, I always prepare my own food, and but I'll eat stuff, I'll try to eat very simply. So if I'll make like a minestrone soup, and I'll just have that in my trailer, or something really simple like rice crackers with honey or something. Do you know what I mean? Something that's going to keep you going, but it's not going to fill you up and make you like completely exhausted. That's the key thing, is that you're in this state of, you're in this kind of like emotional purgatory for the 12 hours that you're on set. And you can't commit to anything because you never know when somebody's going to go, okay, we're ready. And they keep changing things and whatever. So, and the same goes with food. Like, you can't just go, oh, now I'm going to have that cheeseburger, you know, because you don't know. They can be like, okay, we're ready for your close-up, you know, or now the nude scene. So well, I don't get those, but other people do. So, yeah, I think, for me, the lighter, the better. Soup. Yeah, soup.
Every time I'm at one of those press days waiting for interviews, the second I have like a big plate of food and I sit down and I eat the first bite, then I get called for my interview.
Always.
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 Without fail.
Without fail. Yeah.
As
soon as you close the door to the bathroom, they knock on your trailer.
So you have a good way to keep the energy up, but do you have an on-set vice, like a specific snack or a drink you turn to when just like the day's really hard and you kind of like need a little kick in the you-know-what to get through it?
No. Espresso. That's it.
Really good espresso.
But then you can't do too much of that, because then you're... The only thing I ever ask for is an espresso machine in my trailer. I don't ask for really anything else. I don't need anything else. I'll bring everything else. Just give me an espresso machine.
I'm filing away all of these tips for my day-to-day right now. One more food question for you. How do you feel about doing scenes involving meals? And do you have any tips for doing those scenes, but not overdoing it?
Yeah, I'm really good at it now. Don't eat. It's really simple. Pretend to eat, and there are ways of doing it. It's like the way people would pretend to smoke. Some people are really good at it. Some people aren't so good at it. But I eat, if someone's like, it's a food scene, I'm like, okay. And there are ways of sort of, you know, doing stuff, going like that, and then going, you know, I want to tell you something, or whatever. You know, so it doesn't, you're not actually eating. You eat very little, break off a little piece of bread, do this, move stuff around on your plate. Because if you do it, you literally can't continue doing the scene, particularly if it's a dinner scene with a lot of people. There's lots of coverage. It could take hours, days. There's no point. Figure out a way not to do it.
That tip is making me think of this question I ask every once in a while. What is a seemingly small day-to-day thing that is the most difficult to do believably on screen? Things like fake driving, fake waking up, fake sneezing, something like that.
Everything is. I think everything, every bit of human behavior. But no, I think it's interesting you're talking about the driving. It's true. You can tell, and it's so you never really get used to it. If you're on a rig, or if you're doing poor man's process, right, which is when you're in the studio and they got the lights sort of swinging around you, and then they're going to green screen everything, you know. Which they're getting back to a lot now, because with CGI, I mean, you can do it, and it looks like nobody knows. Also, it saves so much money. It saves so much time. You don't have to shoot at night, driving around wherever. But you can always tell, because people have a tendency, and every actor does this. People have a tendency to just keep doing this, because they feel like, and you're trying to do the fucking dialogue, and everyone's doing this all the time, and you think, is there something wrong with that car? Like, are the wheels out of alignment? Why is he doing that? And I was just doing this, not literally like 3 weeks ago or something, and I caught myself going like this. Yeah, well, I know. You know, and I'm doing it. I'm like, oh, fuck, I did that. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll put my hand down here so that you're not seeing my hand as much, because your body can't help but do it. It's really weird. Or people will do the opposite, where they just don't do enough, and you're like, well, is that a self-driven car? Like, how's that car going?
Could be nowadays.
Yeah.
All right, so going back to some credits here, before I dig into the specific list I want to hit, I got two more early project questions, because this can be a big thing when you're first starting out in this industry. Of all of your earliest shows and films, which one would you say, like, best reflected how you wanted the industry to see you? The first thing you did that made you say to yourself, like, yes, this well reflects what I'm capable of?
Well, I love doing the Pelican Brief with Alan Pakula, even though it was not a huge role. It was a really interesting role. I think Murder One was a show that I did here, and that was like almost 30 years ago. And that and Big Night sort of happened simultaneously. So for me, those two things were, they just happened to work out at the same time. I mean, thank God Murder One happened, because I was completely broke. And I had just bought my first house, and I mean, I could barely pay the mortgage. And Big Night happened simultaneously, and luckily we worked out the thing. But those are two very different roles, and so I think those two things.
That aligns perfectly with my next question, because one of the things that impresses me most about your filmography is the variety on it, because this is an industry that does have a habit of boxing people into the first thing they do and do very well. But I mean, constantly, really, every single film is something different and special for you. Is that more so a case of the projects that wound up coming your way and working out, or is that something you actively had to work to make happen?
A lot of it was projects that came my way, but a lot of it was, it's both. I had to actively not take roles, particularly Italian mafiosi or just bad people because you have a darker complexion than, the leading guy. So, yeah, there were periods where there's a 10-year period where I would refuse to play any mafiosi. I wouldn't do it at all. And there were times when, like I needed a job and I was like, I can't do it. I can't perpetuate that. I can't perpetuate that image of Italians. Not that they don't. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's my agent. I don't want to perpetuate that. It's just silly. And, Big Night was a kind of response to that, because Big Night, there's no mention of the mafia or anything in there. But for me, when I did it one more time when I did Sam Mendes' film, when I did Road to Perdition, because nobody was good. It wasn't like the Italians were bad. It's like everybody was a gangster. And that was an interesting story. The characters had real depth and so on and so forth. But, yeah, so I had to actively say no.
A broader question that's kind of adjacent to that. I do like to ask this as frequently as I possibly can because I think it's important. Do you remember the very first time you could feel the power of your own voice on a set, when you spoke up about something and something about either the way the set was run or the material itself changed for the better?
No, I don't think so. I guess, I mean, obviously it was when I was directing, but I do remember, I can't remember anything specifically, but you realize after some time that I think it was after I had directed that people then would listen more, because they were like, oh, well, he's seen it from the other side. I can't point to a specific time, but yeah.
I'll squeeze in a couple questions about directing. How did you come to the conclusion that you should make your feature directorial debut alongside your good friend Campbell Scott? And ultimately, how did it benefit the experience and maybe impact you as a director going forward because you did it first together?
Yeah. I had always seen movies where actors had directed them, and to me, a lot of them were great, but there was always one aspect of the film that was off. A lot of times that was their performance. It was either too indulgent or whatever, or if their performance was good, or they indulged the other actors. If their performance was good, there was there would be maybe a preciousness to the film. There was always, or the lighting was off, or something. There was always something, and I thought, well, of course. I mean, you're doing this thing. You're trying to do all these different things at once on a really low budget. So to me, it was best to have a co-director. I wanted someone to watch my performance and make sure that I was doing the right thing. But Campbell was perfect because he's so not Italian that he would see things that I never saw. And I was closer to the piece because I wrote it with my cousin, Joe Tropiano. And so having that set of eyes that's just that little bit distant made a big difference.
Is there anything about directing yourself, either there or any of the future films that you wound up directing too, that I guess made you rethink your own craft as an actor by viewing it from a different vantage point?
Oh yeah. Again, it taught me to not be so precious, to just do it. Like not just do it and walk away, not phone it in. I'm not talking about that. But know what you want, go in and do it. And then I could look at it and say, oh no, that doesn't work because of this. I began to see myself not as myself, but just as an actor. And that was a great gift.
In hopes you will go on to direct more. If you could learn more about a different job on a film set to maybe strengthen how you operate as a leader, as a director, what particular job would you choose and why?
I'd be very interested in production design, costume design, without question. Being a DOP or a DP there's far too many numbers involved, and mathematics, I can't do that. But I think probably production design.
Solid choice right there. All right, back to my little roadmap here. I want to go back to Devil Wears Prada first. And for that one, this is a thing in the industry that I love asking about because it's the idea of like breaking out in Hollywood as an actor, because from our limited vantage point, it looks one way, and then the person experiencing it might be going through a completely different type of experience when that happens. And a lot of people refer to Devil Wears Prada as your breakout, even though you accomplished so much before that movie came out. When that movie hit, what did that feel like for you, and how did you notice things changing for the better?
They didn't change for the better. I couldn't get a job after that movie. I'm not kidding. Just couldn't. And I ended up doing something that was profitable on television that I really loved doing, but I couldn't get a job. So, and prior to getting that, I was struggling. I had made a lot of movies. I was fine, but it wasn't like, they were knocking down my door. And they were already filming The Devil Wears Prada when I was cast. So they couldn't decide what they wanted. And oddly enough, it's my friend Ellen Lewis who cast the film, who cast all of my movies. And still to this day, I can't stand her for it. No, I'm kidding. But we always do joke about it. I was like, that's good. You went through every actor in Christendom before you came to me. But then after that, the movie was a big hit. We had such a good time, and it's a beautiful movie. And then I was like, silence. Huh. I know. It's weird.
It's shocking to me because I've got the roadmap laid out, and it's one.
Nope.
Seems like one good thing after the next.
Yeah, but yeah.
I do want to follow up on something that you just brought up with Devil Wears Prada. So you mentioned that you were cast when filming was already underway, and I think the way you somewhat phrased it is that they didn't really know what they wanted for that role. Yeah. What is it like stepping into a project where I'm sure it was a very strong script, but they're still figuring out the details and then figuring out how you can contribute to crafting that character your way?
It was scary. I had like a week to prepare, and I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? And there was a guy that I knew what I wanted him to look like. The glasses I was very particular about. And of course, you're playing a gay character. You're not going to send it up. You're not going to be stupid about it, because you get sick of seeing that stuff. And to me, it was just it had to be as subtle as possible. The hard part was, I mean, you're going in, you're having all these costume fittings, you're trying to figure out how to do this thing, and then suddenly your first day of filming is your penultimate scene in the film. And you're like, oh, God, this is a nightmare. But it all worked out. Annie, it was with Annie, and it was so great. And Meryl I knew a bit. And then, then I got to know Emily, and it was all fine.
Trying to remember all of my follow-up questions. You just said Meryl, so my mind is going down that lane right now. So you knew her a little before doing that movie. That was the first time you collaborated as actors, and also seeing her operate as a leader on set. I'll lean into that a little bit. What is something she did on that set that kind of, made you stop and go like, yes, this is why you are a positive force in this industry, an icon that this business needs and will make it better?
Because she stands up for herself, and she stands up for other people. She's not afraid of that. And that's impressive. She was slightly distant when we were filming because she was playing the person that she was playing. Whereas when we did Julia and Julia, she was the opposite. But it made sense for her to be that way, because if she was going to fuck around all day with me and Emily, and that would have been not good for anyone. She needed to focus on what she needed to do, and Emily and I in a way, became those two people, giggling and laughing and being snipey. Not really. And Annie too. And we all sort of became bits and pieces of those people. But yeah, she has incredible presence, as we know. We respect her more than practically anybody in show business. But she's not afraid to stand up for herself and for other people.
Look at this beautiful facility we're sitting in.
Right?
Now.
I know.
It's testament to it.
I know.
So another follow-up question I had. You brought up that after Devil Wears Prada came out, there was a TV show. I'm assuming that's ER. It might be.
I think so, yeah.
I grew up a little obsessed with ER. It's like one of my very first memories, like really getting into a show and like processing like the themes and ideas and the things that I was seeing. With that one, I'm interested in your experience kind of jumping aboard a show at a point where it's already like well underway, well-oiled machine, hugely popular. I think it was the 13th season. What was your experience like jumping on a fast-moving train like that, and how did that team help you acclimate quickly?
I was afraid. I knew Maura Tierney. I didn't know Maura, but I had always admired her. And I was very afraid. I was very nervous, and I had to commute to L.A. from my house in Westchester. My wife was ill with cancer, which we had discovered just before we started shooting The Devil Wears Prada. So she was going on and off in treatments. And I took the job because it was a great role. Obviously, it was a great show. I needed money, and, because we were traveling around the world trying to, figure out a way to, help her. But that cast, in fact, I just ran into John Stamos on the plane, and I hadn't seen him for many years. The cast was incredible, and the directors were wonderful. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I absolutely loved it. Loved it. I mean, I had great difficulty remembering the medical jargon. And they had a wonderful guy who was the advisor, technical advisor, medical advisor, and who had been the head of an ER, and I think he still did do that sometimes. He was absolutely brilliant. And I said to him, look, I'm freaking out. Like, I can't remember these lines. He goes, how are you supposed to remember them? He goes, you can't. He goes, you went to university to study whatever. People go to university to study whatever. He goes, I went to university and studied medicine, which means I learned a completely different language. He goes, I speak a completely different language than you speak. He goes, I speak English, and then I speak this other language. He goes, you never learned that language. How are you supposed to suddenly learn it like that and remember it? And I went, oh, yeah, okay, now I don't feel so bad. Because, you can't.
Whether it's that kind of jargon or anything else in any other profession that you might play, what is a tip or a trick that you have learned so that you can nail the line when you have to?
Write it down on the patient's bed sheet.
Makes all the sense in the world.
Why pretend? I mean, the audience will never know unless you're looking at it like that, and then.
Now I'm going to go back and analyze all your scenes.
Yeah. Please don't. No, I think you get. Once you start doing something, once you get into the rhythm of it, and you understand the writing, you understand the rhythm, it comes more swiftly. But there is no question there are times where you're doing something and you just go like, what is it? And somebody goes, it's this. Oh, right. Sorry. I mean, that's a huge part of film and television acting. We know that. But I don't think, particularly as I get older, it's hard to remember things. It's hard to remember. I almost forgot to come here today. It's hard to remember things, and sometimes you do need a little help. I mean, there are people who use those things. I couldn't do that. Also, I have no hair to cover it, so what's the point? But I know that I wouldn't do. But sometimes you just need a little help.
I need a little help sometimes. My notes are here for a reason.
Yeah.
I get it. Next one on my list.
Yeah.
Lovely Bones. With that, I do want to ask about getting nominated for an Oscar. That is not why you do the work, but it is a really big deal. And
that's not why we do it?
Yeah. I mean, maybe for some people, to each their own, but it is a really big deal when something like that happens. And depending on where you're at in your life, where you're at in your career, it can mean something extra special. So when that nomination came through, what did it mean to you at that point in your career?
Oh, it meant a huge amount to me. That movie was a really hard movie to do, simply because of the subject matter. And playing that character, I was very uncomfortable with it. I didn't want to do it. In fact, I tried to talk myself out of the job, a job that I needed too, because I think I was so afraid to do it. And I remember saying to Peter Jackson on at the time it was like a satellite feed because he was in New Zealand, and he goes, "I want you to do this role," and I was like, I said, "Why me?" He goes, "Because you're funny," and I was like, "Well, you're insane," but. I understood what he was saying. He was saying that I wouldn't be too heavy-handed with it, and I did understand what he was saying. It was a great honor to work with him and to be in that beautiful, terrifying film, and an honor to be nominated, as they say. It really was. My wife, again, during that time was ill. I shot in Pennsylvania, then we shot down in New Zealand. She came with our kids who were little at the time, and we really had a really wonderful, wonderful time. But unfortunately, she was never, she died before the movie was released and before the whole thing, the Academy Award and all that, nomination and all that. So... It meant a great deal to me. And then right after filming that movie, I did Julie and Julia, like immediately afterwards. So that was a great sort of antidote to the horror of, of the Lovely Bones. But then, unfortunately, Kate was alive then, but she unfortunately died before both of those movies came out. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you got to have that experience while filming The Lovely Bones.
Yeah.
I love seeing the cast of that movie thrive, too. Obviously, Saoirse is doing very well, and Rose McIver has a hugely successful show in Ghosts, and I just adore seeing everybody in that movie soar.
I just saw Saoirse because she lives, in London, and yes, in fact, we're do a cooking session because she wants to learn really how to cook.
What are you going to teach her?
I'm not telling you that.
Okay.
Irish stew.
Okay.
No, I don't know.
I already told you I'm a terrible cook. Anything you would say right now would go completely over my head. I can heat things up in an air fryer, and that's about it. So another comedy you did, and I was actually told when I signed up to moderate this, I was told you have to ask about Easy A. There is no interview without Easy A, and I get it. That is a special film that I and many, many people out there thoroughly enjoy watching over and over. And you in particular made a very big impression in that movie.
Oh, I'm glad. That was one of the best experiences. And again, not to keep, but it was soon after my wife had passed away. And, they said, look, you come in, it's like 5 days. And I was like, okay. And it was Patty Clarkson, who's one of my dearest friends, that we were going to play husband and wife. And I went and did it. And it was I think I probably worked 3-4 days or something. It was so much fun. Obviously Emma was a kid for the most part at that time. Absolutely incredible. Again, like Emily and like Saoirse, just a person who you're like, how do you do that? Like, how do you act like that? And you're like 12, Incredible. Just a great, great fun experience. And that's the kind of director who the script was so good, you'd do the script, but then he'd go, just make something up about the blah, blah, blah. And I go, can I say, let me try this? And he'd go, yeah, try that. I love that.
I don't know if you remember this with such specificity, but what is something you tried on that set? You thought to yourself, like, that is like so much, they're never going to use it, and now it's in the finished cut of the film.
Well, no, I did. I did say to the kid that we adopted in the film, I was just looking at him and I go, so where are you from originally? And just as a joke one day, and they kept it in,
A lot of very memorable moments in that. I'll follow up on Emma there a little bit because, like, yet another one that is just like soaring in every which way, all different kinds of films. You mentioned that watching her work on that set, there were certain things she did that made you go like, how? Yeah. Do you remember the very first thing you saw her do that made you say, like, maybe how, but also like, you are going far in this industry?
It was just so effortless. There was no effort. It was like they'd go rolling, and then she'd just start talking and do it, and they'd say cut, and then it would be over, and then you were just like, it was seamless. The same with Emily. Same with Saoirse. Saoirse's the one who taught me how to act, really.
What's something Saoirse taught you?
There was the scene where we finally, after like 5 months of shooting, we finally get to the scene where, I bring her down into the horrible pit that I built, and, I'm sort of talking to her and trying to sort of, and then she suddenly realizes and she has to get out, and she starts to climb out, and I grab her, and, you don't see anything. You never shot any scene where there was anything like that, but it was the whole idea of it and the creepy awfulness of it. And I kept saying, I said to Peter, look, Peter, I hate this scene. And I know it's like one of the crucial scenes in the movie. I go, but can we shoot this very quickly? And he was like, yep, no problem. And he had a bunch of cameras around. And after every take, I'd say to Saoirse, I go, are you okay? And she'd go, yeah, I'm fine. Next take, I go, you okay? You all right? Because I had to keep grabbing her. She'd say, yes, I'm fine. That's all right. It's okay. 4 or 5 takes. Finally, I go, are you all right? She goes, Stanley, I'm fine. She goes, how are you doing? And I went, oh, not so good. I'm just... She was 12 or 13.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Consistently incredible. So from Easy A, I wanted to jump to a broader question about working on film franchises. A lot of time when I prepare for these things, I'll always at least read through someone's Wikipedia before digging deep, just to get like a bird's eye view. And yours is like broken up into sections with subtitles, and there's a point where it's like franchise work. And there's a bit. You had Captain America, Transformers, Hunger Games. When you're deciding whether or not to sign on for a franchise film, are there any different things you have to consider when committing to a series of films versus anything else?
Well, I mean, for me, the roles like Transformers, we thought there was going to be a second one of that iteration of it. And then Michael changed his mind, and we didn't continue. However, I did do the next one, but as a completely different character, which I thought was really fun. But I was happy to sign on because, look, a franchise, and that was quite a while ago. And franchise films, and now we know how many there are, they give you a steady income. And if it's a really interesting role, that can be great. For me, I'm not the lead guy. So I'm not the guy who's going to be there for 6 months, a year shooting. I'm the guy who's going to be going in and out. So it's easier for me to sign on to something like that. I'm not Chris Evans, who's going to sign on to those jobs, and that's going to be 10 years of his life. I mean, a very lucrative and amazing life. But that is a big commitment. For me, if the character is interesting, yeah, were another one to come around and the character was interesting, yeah, I'd do it in a second. I have 5 children, I mean, I gotta, I love doing them. Like Captain America, to me, was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I worked for 3 weeks. Chris and I became friends. Haley and I became friends. I absolutely loved the character. I loved the Captain America comics when I was a kid. And so to be a part of that and to see it brought to life in a way that I never could have imagined when I was a kid was just like incredibly exciting to me. I felt like a kid when I was making it,
and you
even
got to
though I
play
was
the
playing a
character again.
70-year-old man. What?
You got to play the character again in What If?
Did I?
Did you voice the character?
Oh, I did. You're right.
Version?
You're right.
Yeah.
Jeez, I thought it was something I did. Yes, right. Yes, yeah. But I love that. Like I love all that Marvel stuff. I'm a sucker for it.
I'll ask 2 follow-ups. I'll stick with the animation idea first, because you've done other voice acting work, and
Yeah.
I'm just curious, in general, when doing voice acting versus screen acting, is there any particular, I guess, like creative itch that voice acting scratches that's specific to that medium, something that you have a really good time exploring that you just don't get the opportunity to do on camera?
Yeah, you can go completely crazy. Especially depending on what it is that you're doing. When you're doing, a kid's animation thing, and you can just be you're like a child. You're just like a child in a playroom, just running around and screaming and pretending that you're somebody. You don't have to put makeup on. It's not raining because you're inside. Do you know what I mean? You do it during the day, and then you go home. It is so much fun. It's just one of the most satisfying things an actor can do.
It does. I mean, it does set the idea of potentially going to work like that in comfy clothes also makes me really
Oh
happy.
my God.
I feel like we all do our best work in the comfiest clothes.
It's amazing. Like, you want a sandwich? Yeah, I'll have a sandwich. It's like, it's great. It's so much fun. You're just acting like a kid. You're just playing around.
Oh, I'll ask you one silly question. I'm not even sure if you do much of this in the particular characters you voiced in animation. When it comes to efforts, what is the most difficult effort for you to pull off and make sound natural, and what effort comes the easiest to you?
What do you mean effort? What do you mean?
Like when characters are fighting and you have to like
take
you mean
in the
or make eating noises or something like that.
I think it could be the fighting stuff, because it's lots of and you're like, then you think, what am I doing? Like, if I didn't do it then, why am I doing it now? Do you know what I mean? When I was filming, I didn't go, but now I'm going, and I go, don't you think that's a bit much? And sometimes we all look at it and go, oh yeah, we actually don't need that. But then other times you see it and you're like, oh, it really helps it. It helps.
It's wild how ridiculous it could sound in the booth, and then you hear it in the finished product,
yeah.
and you're like, that
And
makes
it
all the
works.
sense in the
Yeah.
world.
Well, because it's an abstract in the booth, right?
Exactly.
There's no frame of reference. It's just a guy going. I think doing this thing, I did this animated show, where I played an elderly woman, and it was that Josh Gad had produced, and my God, it was so much fun, because you can go crazy. You could go completely crazy, and you could make stuff up. You could do. It was so, and the scripts were really good anyway, but it was just so much fun to do that, to play like an old woman, like an old posh American woman.
certainly seems fun. What also seems fun is my other follow-up question from before. I got to ask a little bit about Hunger Games because
yeah.
that like those books were a big deal to me. It's part of the reason why I sit in this chair because when those books were optioned, I was one of the only people on my team who had read them, and it instantly gave me work, and it gave me a foundation in this line of work, which was wonderful and
Right.
greatly appreciated. That character is very like big and bold and colorful, and it feels like it's the type of character that you could either like push too far or get just right. So was there any trial and error in terms of figuring out how big to go with him, what his voice should sound like, his posture, all those little details?
Yeah, for me it was I imagined him as a cross between who's that guy? What's his name? Wayne Newton. You know, with the hair and the
yes.
teeth. And a very extreme the British talk show host who's Graham Norton, who is a friend of mine and who I think is absolutely brilliant, but a really extreme version of him. And so if you put those two together and you know, then you have like, whoa, what's that? You know? And I said, no, I want to have these really huge teeth. And I think he should have this fake tan. And I was trying to do a nose, but that didn't work. I wanted to look like he had 17 nose jobs. But we couldn't do it. It looked really just bad. But luckily I had this amazing makeup woman, and it was so much fun. It really was. I just sort of threw myself into it really big the first time around, and then we would modulate it as we went along. And you can just feel it, because the thing is, the guy has to really talk to the person. And then, we're in this heightened world. So he has to be huge, huge. So the only way to do it is to start big. And then it's easier to take away.
Pitch perfect.
Thank you.
And then seeing it followed up by Jason Schwartzman in
Oh yeah,
Ballad of
no, I
Songbirds
haven't
and
seen.
Snakes. Very, very impressive, because you set a high bar.
Yeah.
Set a high bar, and he comes pretty damn close. I'm impressed.
Oh, but I have to say it. He's a wonderful actor. Yeah, he's great.
Before I start to tiptoe into Conclave here, which I will just preface by saying, incredible work from you individually, and
Thank you.
that entire ensemble, top tier in every respect. Same with every single aspect of what it took to put that film together. I did want to ask two more broader questions before doing that. I just love emphasizing the value of a good scene partner, because these films only get made with good scene partners. It's never all about the one person. It's about what you do together. Can you give us some examples of times on past sets when scene partners gave you just what you needed, and that's what helped you crack a tough scene yourself?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly on Conclave, you had Rafe, who was always right there, and John, and all of that, who are just so focused and giving. It's really just about giving. Meryl is like that. Emily is like that. As I mentioned, Joe Pesci was like that. You have so many people. The cast of the Hunger Games. Everyone is just like right there, and that's why they're all so good, because they're not there for themselves. It's like what I was saying before, is that everybody's there to tell that story, and to do the best job they can in telling that story. But they're also there for each other. And if you're not there for each other, the whole thing starts to fall apart. And so I've been very lucky to have worked. Tony Shalhoub, to me, is just one of the greatest actors of all time. I've been lucky enough to direct him. I directed him in a play on Broadway. I directed him in 3 movies. He's absolutely brilliant. And he is so present. And without that, he couldn't be as good as he is. But the projects that he does wouldn't be as good. And the people across from him wouldn't be as good.
you've worked with some of the best of the best,
Oh,
and I love it.
I'm so lucky.
So now another broader question, but turning it towards yourself as an actor. And we've brought up a couple of different techniques that you've used over the course of this conversation. So kind of to bring that idea home, what is a particular technique that you find is, part of your core as an actor, something you've been using all along and hold tight to, but then can you also give us an example of a technique you've used more recently for the very first time?
I suppose really that the technique is just really understanding. It's not a tech. I don't know what it is.
It doesn't have to be a formal technique.
Yeah. It's not. Is really understanding the tone of a script, and the arc of the story as a whole, and then your own individual arc, and of course then how do you fit into that whole? Because I am. Whether you're playing whether you're a leading character or not a leading character, which I'm often a second lead or a third lead, it's really really important for you to fit seamlessly in that whole. So I think really knowing the script is absolutely crucial. And if you think that there are places in the script that don't work, just say it. Don't mean just say the script. I mean say, I don't think this works. Here's what I think maybe it could be, or can we try this? The other thing is, don't be afraid to try different things, and within reason. And the reason I say that is because sometimes a director might not know. The director may have a different idea of what the character is, but you know better, especially after 43 years. You'll know better what that tone is supposed to be and what's going to work. And sometimes they'll say, why don't you try this? And I go, no, you don't want that. Trust me. This is why you don't want it. And then usually they'll go, because I'm also older than all of them, they'll go, oh, all right. And it's not like, oh, I'm so arrogant, I know more about, it's like, no, because if we go there, then everything else starts to fall apart from there. And what it will also do, because sometimes people get excited about a character, and I had this once in a movie that was a comedy that just didn't work at all. And I was playing a rather extreme character, and the director kept pushing me to go farther and farther and farther, and I was like, okay, and I did it, and then I saw it, and it didn't work. And I knew instinctively that I shouldn't have done that. But you feel bad. You're trying to sort of please someone, and you don't want to sound like an idiot or be rude and I did it, and I wasn't happy with it. It didn't work. It wasn't funny. And if you know what's funny, and a director is telling you to do something you know isn't funny, just don't do it.
It's one of the most fascinating parts of a collaborative art form. We talked about it a little earlier, the idea of when to trust yourself versus when to hear others out, and it's case by case basis.
Yeah, to me it's, I think particularly in a weird way, particularly with comedy, I think you have to be really careful, because you take one wrong step and the whole thing just goes, and the laugh doesn't happen, and then it can affect then the next scene and the next gag or the next whatever. This is really, really evident. It's more evident on stage than perhaps on film. It takes a little longer but on stage it's right away, like you get it. It's not funny. And also if in farce, which is like, it's like a science. And if somebody pushes something a little too far, it just goes, not funny. It's just not funny. Everybody goes, oh, it's so big. And so farce can be big, but it still has to be logical and real. And it's when you remove the logic that it becomes unfunny. And it's like anything. It's like, if you're painting or drawing, the key thing is knowing when to stop painting. It's not about actually so much about painting itself. It's about knowing when to stop painting.
I'm thinking about all the areas in my life when I can apply, like just when to stop, when to be done with
Yeah,
something.
when am I done? Because you can be drawing something and then suddenly you go, oh, maybe it just, and then you do that thing and then the whole thing just goes, doesn't work.
So true. It's
Yeah.
so true. I feel like I should probably save this question for the end of our conclave discussion, but because you were bringing up tone so much earlier in that answer, it is making me think of this. What was it like seeing Conclave, like the finished film, for the very first time? Because every single time I watch it, in particular when it comes to the score, I think about how much that score so heavily defines the tone of that film. So was Edward able to kind of set that tone as accurately as we see in the finished film while you were shooting?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not like it was this incredibly serious set, and we laughed and we had a great time. But you see the way he's composing shots. You see he explains to you very clearly. He goes, "Look, I'm sorry I have to keep shooting you doing this, but I need it because I'm going to create a sequence that's going to be like this, and I need to have it from these different positions because I have to because there's this repetition of we keep voting." So he said, he explains everything to you, so you understand what's happening. Otherwise, you start to be driven mad. You're like, didn't we do this already? But yes, and he's very specific about what he wants and his camera placement. But he's also incredibly open to change, and he'll change something like that, and that's why he's a great director. And I remember him doing this one scene where it was towards the end of filming, and there was this one scene. It was late in the day. You could feel everybody was getting tired. It was like a Friday or something. And he said, okay, so he's going to come in here and put the camera over here and blah, 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 blah. And we were all seated out in this sort of vestibule outside an office, and we took our positions and everything. And he went, so the camera will be here, the guy will come in. And I was looking at this tableau from this perspective, my character's perspective. And I said, wait, Edward, come here. And I said, look, just look from here and just look at the guy, look it through the door, and look at if the guy comes in and he sits at the desk and like that. And he looked at it and he went, oh, yeah, great. Move the camera, put it over here, and blah, 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 blah. Most directors would go like, fuck off, But because he knew, because Rafe and I had both directed films, like he knew, he kept saying, I'm here directing two directors. But it was never like, oh, Edward, we're going to show you how to do this. Hardly. It was like, it becomes even more of a collaboration because you all know it really, really well. You know both sides of it.
Best idea wins. I love that kind of environment.
It's beautiful.
Going back to the very beginning of the conclave process now, big two-part question about that. What is something about your process when preparing for a role that has always stayed the same, but then can you also isolate something unique about preparing to play Aldo?
Again, for me, Aldo was very much about like he has a real sort of clarity, like he has a real moral sense, a strong moral sense. He has a clarity of vision for where he believes the church should go, and yet he is ambiguous about his own feelings about becoming Pope. He doesn't want to become Pope. But then, of course, there is a part of him that he realizes that he keeps trying to get his friend, obviously Rafe, to become Pope. And then he's like, I don't want to be Pope. And then suddenly he realizes, maybe I do want to be Pope. And then he hates himself. But it's because we never really know ourselves. So for me, as a person who doesn't really know himself, it was a very easy role to play. As far as preparation, again, it's really, for me, there are some roles that require more preparation than others, more research than others. Some require none at all. It's there on the page. This was somewhere in between the two. Because I knew the novel, I had read it a couple years before. They had sent me the script. I read the script. It was equally as beautiful as a novel. I didn't have to do a lot, I'll be honest. except bring those words to truthful life.
Did any of what you did have to do involve creating backstory for him? Because the movie, as it should, it keeps us in the conclave. It keeps us in that voting and that negotiating process. But we need to make sure that he still feels like a whole person. Like his actions and motivations are backed by real experience. So what is the key to making sure we feel that even though we don't see or hear about it?
Yeah, I'm not a big one for backstory. I must admit, if it's there on the page, that's all I need. The backstory will be between the lines. I think that and also the character kept changing. Originally, he was Italian. So as we're prepping, as we're starting, he was Italian. So I was going to do an Italian accent. And then I saw Edward. We actually just happened to run into each other one day in London. And he said, I've been thinking about, I was wondering I think he could probably be American. And I said, because you don't want the accent, right? And he went, yeah, I'm worried about it. And he goes, I'm not worried about you doing an Italian accent. He goes, but I think it might just take, and I said, no problem. Whatever works for the film. So then suddenly, I could have been prepping this whole backstory about this Italian guy, and then a week later he's American, and then that could have changed again. So unless I feel it's really egregiously wrong after I've accepted the role, no. If that was more right for the film, particularly a film that's going to be going out to English-speaking audiences. It's an English language film. Rafe's character was Italian. They were both Italian. And now they're not.
So you jump into filming. I'm always curious about this process. I don't know if you have this experience, but some have explained it to me as, you take on a new character, you jump into a new world, and you have that like aha moment where you kind of find your footing and you really understand who your character is. Did you have that with Aldo, either in prep or on set when you were doing a scene? Yeah,
there was this one scene. I was very nervous the first day of shooting. I remember I always get a bit nervous, and but once we shot the first scene, where I come into the sort of huge courtyard and talk to Rafe, and I say, apparently it's supposed to be me, and I don't want it. Nobody, you start to relax, and you think, okay, now I can start to feel who he is. Look, the costume helps too. That's a huge thing for me. If the shoes aren't right and the thing isn't right, it's like, no, nope. And you have to sort of keep looking at it and looking at yourself and feeling it for me. And then you go, okay. But there was this one scene where we're looking at the robes, the garments in this little antechamber, and that scene for me felt very comfortable. Like I knew who the guy was in that scene. I don't know why.
It was a great scene.
Yeah, thanks.
So here, I don't know if there's going to be an easy answer to this question, but like this performance has to be like passionate, but also so restrained. Like we can't know like the inner workings of how he is navigating this experience. He's kind of like, holding his cards close, so we can't fully see them. What is the key to balancing that, but also making sure the audience feels and understands enough of what's going on in here?
Again, it's trusting the director, which I did, and trusting yourself, trusting the script, experimenting a bit while you're filming with size of emotion or something. But for me, I think particularly because though he's not Italian, he's Italian American or of Italian descent like I am. There are moments where he has to really come out and really be passionate and really angry and really make a point. And then other times where he's just, and it's a very Italian thing, and there are certain things that Italians will do that no other, nobody else does. There are certain eye movements and certain behavioral things. There's one scene, and I think it's not in the movie anymore, where I had to come in, and I said, Rafe said something to me, and Edward imagined that I would have gotten very upset and everything like that, and I just didn't. I never looked at Rafe, and I said, "Oh, well, you did that, something like that," and I took my thing and I left, and Edward went, "Oh my God," he goes, "I thought it was going to be completely different." I said, "No, he would never do it that way. If he really wants to hurt his friend, he has to do it this way. That's how you hurt somebody. And later, I can yell at him, but I'm going to hurt him now, and I have to do it by not making eye contact with him, and giving it to him like that," which is very Italian.
I would like to see that on a special features menu one day.
Yeah.
I'll go to some collaborations next. You were just talking about Rafe, so I'll go to him first. I know you've worked together before. What is something you saw him do on the Conclave set as a scene partner, but also as like the number one and a leader that teed you all up for success with the film?
Well, he's just great. He's one of the most focused actors I've ever seen. He spoke a lot of Italian in the film, which I thought was amazing, which is not easy to do if you don't speak the language, Latin as well. Had reams of speeches. I think particularly delivering that speech about doubt is one of the most beautiful things ever. He's a highly trained, highly skilled actor who loves what he does. And of course, that's an example for everyone.
You feel it in everything he does. And thinking that this year, like we saw Conclave and The Return kind of back to back, and there's just such different performances.
Yeah.
Endless range. Given how much respect you have for him, and also the fact that you worked together before, is there anything you saw him do on the Conclave set that made even you stop and go like, "My God, I knew you were good, but I never realized you'd be capable of that"?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the facility he had taking all of those aspects of the character and distilling them into that performance. It's really hard to do. Plus, he was preparing for the other films simultaneously. So he was down, we would work out in the mornings, and he was bulking up and doing that. And plus, he's just works constantly. He just never stops.
What a pairing of projects to be working on so close
I know.
together.
He has to do a comedy next, let's face it.
Yeah, I would be happy to see him do literally anything. I'll go back to Edward with him and how he runs a set. Can you tell us something about the Conclave set that I guess signals that it is an Edward Berger set? Like if anyone who knew him stepped onto that set, they would immediately know that this is his.
Yeah, it's fun, it's organized, it's efficient, and you're all working towards the same thing. And he's incredibly smart, but he's very kind. He's very kind.
I feel like every set should have those qualities.
Yeah, and it's fun. He's funny. I mean, it's not like he's very serious about it, as I said, but he's very funny.
Does he have a monitor dance? Something he does behind the monitor that signals he's really loving a take?
No, I haven't seen that yet. No.
Fair enough. I'll go back to you talked a little bit before about the reaction shots. There's also a number of wide shots in the movie that are big group scenes. And one of my favorite things about Conclave, I found it to be very powerful the first time that I watched it, But why I love watching it over and over is because in all those big group scenes, I zero in on a different person
Yeah.
and I'm able to like track what they're going through in that moment based on little subtleties when they're only like a teeny tiny fraction of the frame. What is the key for you when you tackle one of those scenes where you are not the focus, but everything about your body language matters?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're part of the whole, and it's like doing a play. Just because you're not the one speaking on stage, you better be engaged in what you're doing, and you see actors sometimes that doesn't happen, but you're there, you're doing it, you're reacting to what's happening, you're all focused on the arc of that scene, the arc of your character. I think one of the great things about this movie is not only is it a beautiful looking movie, and it has this incredible complexity to it, the political intrigue and the emotions of it. But Edward is using cinema the way cinema is meant to be used, meaning he's using wide shots, he's using longer takes, and he's using them. He's using classic cinematic composition in order to tell a story without relying on close-up after close-up after close-up after close-up, which is incredibly boring. So he's really using cinema in the way it was meant to be used.
It is pretty incredible how many voting scenes there are, but
Yeah.
like how dynamic his style and his eye is. That's what
Yeah.
keeps those scenes
It's-
electric.
And that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, because, it could be really boring.
And there isn't a single moment of this film where I'm not on the edge of my seat.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were in the room for this, but this has become like a widespread favorite moment of the movie. I believe in this particular frame, you are just out of it. Were you in the room when Tedesco uses the vape? And was that improvised?
So, yeah. No, I think it was in the script. But he's just so good, that guy.
In every
Sergio,
scene.
No, he's amazing. He's amazing. Absolutely amazing performance. Beautiful performance.
To highlight more of your wonderful ensemble, can you give us an example of two people in the Conclave ensemble with polar opposite approaches to the work, where when you're their primary scene partner, you'll have a different experience as an actor?
No, not really. I can't. I don't. I can't. No, I think that we all worked very similarly, which is why the movie works in a way. We all knew why we were there, to tell this great story and, play these amazing characters and focus on what you're doing. And then, some would cut, and then suddenly somebody would look at somebody and start laughing about something that happened. Well, this is why the cast works. So when we're shooting the sort of opening-ish where the Pope is dead on the bed, so they got this old guy to play the Pope. I don't know if he was an actor. I don't think he was an actor. He was just a guy who was really old. And so we're shooting the scene, and we're all around there, and we're all doing the thing, and John is doing the sort of ritual and all that. The guy kept falling asleep and snoring, and he would move his hands and stuff, and we'd be like, and we're like, oh, it's so sad, the Pope's dead, and everyone's trying to do their thing, and then you just hear. And then the guy would sort of open his eyes and go like, and we were like, cut, cut, cut. So fucking funny. It was so fun, and everyone's doing their best, but you all just look at each other at the end of the take. You're like really focused on the thing, and then that happens, and you try to hold it together, and then we cut, and everybody goes, Jesus Christ. Eventually we were like, can we shoot it without him? Like, just, can you put him in later? It was pretty funny. It was like, do you want him in there? Like, when they're shooting your close-up, they were like, do you want him in there? I was like, no, I don't want him in here. It's fine. I can pretend he's there. I'm pretending I'm a cardinal. I can pretend he's there.
It's going to add a whole new layer to that scene for me.
Yeah.
I got to wind down with you. And I wanted to make sure to end with two of my favorite questions. This first one is something I've been asking a lot recently. Actually, now that I think about it, the reason I started asking this question, it's because there was a movie called The Rule of Jenny Penn with John Lithgow, and you have never seen him like this before. It premiered at Fantastic Fest, and it's his director for that movie that said this. He was talking about him and Jeffrey Rush. He was just explaining how happy it made him to look around and see like what joy and pride they take in their work on set. And it made me really happy to hear that. So while you were making Conclave, do you remember the single most joyful moment you had as an artist?
Yeah, I think, well, part of it was that story I just told you.
Fair enough.
Because we had all of us there, all of us in the same scene, and everybody was just so great and so much fun. And we all shared this experience with this person. That was a really great one. But I think I love that scene in particular. Well, I love the scene in the cafeteria or whatever, the dining hall where John is getting up and sort of Lucian has his thing and John has his thing where he's been called out by Isabella, and I just loved watching him, because he's so tall too. And it's just something, and I've known him for a while and watched him in so many things. And just to be able to watch that and have everyone just sort of staring at him, and his performance is so good in it. I loved that. But I think, some of the other stuff is just the camaraderie that you form with actors. And I wrote about this in this book that just came out a couple months ago, was that basically actors are like at once like the moth and the flame. Like they are drawn to each other, and they're, like kind of vagabonds. And then you make friendships, you create relationships very, very quickly, faster than any other group of people, because you have to, because otherwise you're going to be pretty lonely on location. And so friendships are formed and last forever. And I just think it's one of the most beautiful things about being an actor.
I love that so much. I also love my last question. I end on this question as often as I possibly can.
I also love my last question.
I mean, some of what you just said could answer this, but I insist on asking this as frequently as possible, because in film and television, we give each other awards. I think that is super cool. I think we should keep doing that. I find that nobody in this business tells themselves good job as much as they should. So can you tell me something you did while making Conclave that you'll always be able to look back on and say, you know what, I'm really proud of what I did there?
I'm proud of this scene that that Rafe and I did sitting out on the bench outside. I like that scene very much. And I feel good about what I did. It's one of the only scenes where I felt like I wasn't quite getting it right. And I remember saying to Edward, can I do one more? This is one thing I wanted to try. So I felt pretty good about that. But you're absolutely right about that. There's the old story of the actor who's doing a play, and he gives an incredible performance. And people come backstage and go like, oh my God, what'd you do? I mean, I've seen you do this play before, and I just, but what happened tonight? What did you do? And everyone's like, incredible, incredible, incredible. What'd you do? He goes, I don't know. They're like, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And he walks out and he's feeling great. And he walks past the doorman and he says, good night. And the doorman goes, good night. He goes, a little off tonight, wasn't it? And then that's all he thinks about. He doesn't think about the good stuff. He only thinks about the bad stuff. And a lot of us are like that. And we have to remember not to be.
Mm-hmm. I ask that because I totally understand that myself in a different line of work. Yeah. New Year's resolution, not to walk away from things saying I could have done better. Because
right.
I'm going to say huge, huge, huge congratulations on everything you've accomplished, on Conclave, and all the wonderful things that I know are coming your way in the future. I know you're going to be back on this stage celebrating even more with this audience. Thank you for sharing your experience with us
Thank
today.
you. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you guys all for coming and listening to me babble. And so really, no, it's been a great honor to speak here. Thank you. And I want to thank you. You're amazing. Could you just do this all the time with me and everyone? You're incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.